Hello out there in the YouTubeverse. It is Max. It is Jayrod.
Hi.
And we are back to talk to you about one of our favorite magical things, and that is Pauper. I want to kind of get the elephant, I guess, in the room, the squirrel in the room out of the way first.
Yeah.
And just say that most videos we talk a little bit about Pauper, then we talk a lot about Arena Pauper. This video, I'm going to talk even less about Pauper. And quickly, if you're not super up and up on the meta for actual factual Pauper, Chatterstorm, 1 and a green, make squirrels, make a 1/1 squirrel token with Storm, is kind of taken over the meta in such a way that you have to be able to play around it very effectively, or you get sniped by it. So it's kind of unhealthy for the format. If you saw our last video, I was just gushing over how good and healthy the Pauper format was. Modern Horizons 2 has come out. Between that, some staples for the new Affinity decks have kind of made a bit of a dog's breakfast of the format.
Yeah.
So I don't want to talk on it at this point in time because I do think some bannings are imminent, and I think necessary, personally. So we'll see what WotC does to try to balance out the format. And then from there, we have all the stuff for Modern Horizons 2 that still needs to be unpacked and see how that develops the format before we even get to the Forgotten Realm.
Absolutely. We almost forgot.
So we're just going to move right on to Arena Pauper, which is much more stable and healthy right now.
Yeah, just it's much more stable and healthy, just rare. Because we almost never get to see it.
Yeah, so we don't get to play it that much, but we do love it when it comes around, so we support it as much as we can. Obviously, if you're watching this, you support it, so thanks so much for the support.
Absolutely.
We appreciate it. So we're going to go through kind of in a slightly different manner. Whenever we do these, Jayrod and I tend to have a discussion about the cards and kind of what the best way to talk about them is. This one we're going to talk about a little bit more than usual in terms of cards, but we're going to kind of chunk it out into archetypes and places we feel like they can be used a little bit.
Yeah, if you're looking at the screen, you can see all of my tabs.
So the first card we're going to talk about is for kind of what we call the level 0 deck of the format. The most obvious deck, probably, if somebody was going to say, what do you think would win in Pauper on Arena? And that is the Rats deck.
Yep.
So you just take the Rats. What are they called? Something Rats.
Rat Colony.
Rat Colony. Thank you. One in a black. They get a bump for every other Rat Colony you have out. And the card Feign Death is very good because there's two reasons. One, it keeps the rats alive. That's obvious. One thing, and I've been harping about this since the inception of the format, it is an odd casting cost. You need to run these odd casting costs because your turn 3 is awkward in that deck. Your turn 5 is awkward in that deck. And you need to have something to do with your mana if you want to try to keep pace. So it's basically trading a card out of your opponent's hand for a +1/+1 counter on your already sizable rat. Then on your next main phase, you get to play 1 or 2 more rats and then attack them with a gigantic rat.
Yeah.
It's just a no-brainer. We are already using Supernatural Stamina in place of this card. I think it may replace it or possibly be like copies 5 and 6 or make Supernatural Stamina copies 5 and 6 because this, I think, is just a pretty strict upgrade.
I believe so, yeah.
The 1/1 counter being permanent is just such a big deal. We saw it with Snakeskin Veil over the Ranger's Guile. Mm-hmm. I think it's just it's a good card. So not too much to say about that one. Watch any of our previous Pauper primers for more about that.
Or just,
the 1 CC cost card in that, and it's just that's a gift. So good and bad. I mean, the Rats deck keeps us honest, so I don't hate it.
Yeah, I think almost every time we've played a Pauper event, there has been at least one player that we run into that's playing it, and it's just like, did we prepare for it? No, they have a very good chance of winning.
Yeah, yep.
It can get out of hand real fast.
It can, absolutely. If you're not playing Suffocating Fumes or Blazing Volley, it's just like, oh, how do I beat this card?
Absolutely.
The next card we're talking about is for a very known deck as well, for the Kiln Fiend style, red spells, red aggro style deck. You come to a Knoll Camp, which is the cycle of like DM little phrases.
Yep.
They're usually you or your or something like that.
You come up on a river.
You get like a modal choice here. So the Knoll Camp's no different. I think it's very good in the Kiln Fiend deck because it kind of is playing around with cards the deck already plays, I play the card that gives double strike for my Coria that cycles as kind of my flex slot in that deck. I think the Knoll Camp can definitely fill that void. It's like copies 5 and 6 of Infuriate, or it's like a mini Falter effect where just your dudes can't block. If you've played against that deck, you know you don't have too many dudes. That's basically your creatures can't block this turn.
Yeah. And it's nice because
draw it.
A lot of these effects in red have recently been just creatures without flying. This is just creatures, which is very good.
Yeah, very big deal. No Healer's Hawk blocks for you.
No.
I'm coming in. And being able to get the trigger off the Kiln Fiend and make their creatures not block is real rough. So I think it's a good 2-of in a Kiln Fiend style deck if you don't want to run the double strike card. This I would look at over the double strike card. The double strike plus trample on my Kiln Fiends is very attractive.
Yeah, oh, absolutely.
But the Falter may be better. And the fact it can be modal. If they go to kill the Kiln Fiend with a 2 damage spell, you get the +1 but. That's a big game.
Yeah, it's a defensive spell in an emergency situation for sure.
Mm-hmm. So I think that is definitely a card that, I don't want to say you'll see, but don't dismiss it. You may come, in fact, up on a Knoll Camp at some point.
You may come upon a Knoll Camp.
Yeah.
I don't like that sentence.
Nope. So, moving on to the opposite of the red decks is the little decks that quite can't, and they may be able to finally get there.
They try so hard.
They really do, and we're talking about the Life Gain style decks, the Soul Sister style decks, the Value style decks. You're seeing your curve is usually Soul Warden into the Prophet, whatever the heck his name is.
Impassioned Orator.
Impassioned Orator, thank you. And then your 3-drop is usually some kind of token creation, maybe like an Omen of the Sun or something. That's the style of decks that you would see. And I think these 3 cards we're going to talk about help that particular archetype quite a bit. The first one's Celestial Unicorn. And this is kind of the heavy hitter of the deck. Like, finally have something that can come in and swing and not just die. This card can get enormous. Like, immediately, if you have a Soul Warden out and you play this card, it's getting a trigger. And it's getting a 1/1 counter.
Immediate trigger, because it enters the battlefield. Then Soul Warden triggers, and this is already on the battlefield. So it gets a +1. So, if you have a Soul Warden out, you have a turn 3, 4/3 for 3. It's very good for a mono white deck, most likely.
Yeah, and we've seen a lot of builds playing 4 Soul Warden, 4 of the Orator, and 4 of that cat from Zendikar that's the 1/4 for 3 that does the same gain a life ability. I think it has to enter your battlefield, though, like the Orator.
Yeah, which is fine, because
that's what you're trying to do, is play a bunch of little critters. And it's just, this is kind of a big get for the deck, because it finally has an Abyss-style creature where it's like, it's coming in, 8/8, coming in. And that can come in quick.
Yeah.
Like, if you go 1 is the Soul Warden, 2 is the Orator, then this thing is already a 4/4 when it enters the battlefield, right?
Well, it's a
2/2 base?
It's a 3/2 base.
3/2 base. Okay, so so it's huge.
So you would get 2 triggers off of both of those life gain instances and have a 5/4.
It's 5/4.
It's like a Biograph.
Out of 3 damage range, so red spells are like, shit, now I got a 2-for-1 against this stupid thing?
Yeah.
Like, that's a big deal. So don't dismiss the Unicorn. Definitely make sure you have your unconditional removal ready for that guy. It's going to be very good.
Save a kill spell for this guy.
Very much. Another card that these decks are getting is Dawnbringer Cleric, which I know Jared's a fan of.
I am. I'm a fan of this and the next card.
This and the next card are so cool. These are such cool value gets for this deck.
Like, for me, just having a 2 or less power creature with a lot of good come to play effects, I'm always looking at spoiler season for my Alesha deck, and this could slot in very well, because I always want to have enchantment removal and just graveyard hate, and occasional life gain's not the worst thing either.
No, and in Pauper, it's every mode is relevant. The big struggle this deck has had is against the Ancestral Mask decks. Despite the fact this is a pretty aggressive life gain deck, it really can't handle the bump that the mask players get from Ancestral's just so good.
It really
Your
is.
removal is likely going to be enchantment based if you're in white, because passive is one of your most efficient removal spells, and it's just so good at getting a bigger bonus than you can handle dealing with it. So, especially if there's two. If there's two, it's just like game over. Like, I can't beat this thing.
Yeah.
Now we have the cleric who can come in and go, boop, take out your mask. And you're just like, shit, okay. And they just got triggers. And it's like, all right, there's a real game happening now. Like, and you can't protect your enchantments like you can your creatures in that deck.
Exactly.
So it's a big deal. So the white life gain deck definitely got a big boost from that. Because in the non-mass matchups, like Jared said, you're gaining life, which is not a problem. Or if they're playing like a big escape creature or something in the yard and you just had to like block or they milled it or something, you're like, oh, the Typhon, I don't want that coming back in the late game. I'm just gonna take it out.
Yeah, like mono red, the Hound.
Mm-hmm. Yep,
That
Rage
thing
Hound.
that thing can get out of hand.
Yeah. The Rage Hound is Rage Hound. No doubt. So the next card is really awesome. Priest of Ancient Lore. Very cool card. If you think about it, it looks a little like, really, this is a card you're bringing up on the slide. But if you think about it like a Thraben Inspector you pay for all at once, it's really good.
Yeah, and a bonus life.
Yeah.
For the decks that care about that.
Yeah, it's a really... What's his stat line? 1-3?
2-1.
2-1. 2-1, good stat lines, reverse Thraben Inspector, so it can hit a little bit harder if need be. It comes in, it gains you a life. It comes in, it draws you a card. It's really good. Like, that's good TV right there.
Mm-hmm.
And
I
think... Yeah, I think that's... what you need is you need more cards, right? Like, you're like, man, I've run out of cards. Any non-blue deck is familiar with this problem. Yeah. I've run out of cards, I can't do anything. Now the Unicorn's at least something to draw to that can end a game. The Priest is a way to value through. The Thraben Inspector, obviously, probably already in the list. More ways to draw cards and add bodies to the board, trigger life gain. Just very powerful, I think, for the white life gain style decks. If you're white or paired white-black, I guess you could play black if you splashed a little bit.
Yeah, it might make it into the black-white decks, but if you're not looking to play black-white and just mono-white, this should absolutely be an include.
I agree, yeah. I think if you're playing black-white, you're probably have more efficient ways to draw your cards because of Dust Legion Zealot and Phyrexian Rager.
Yep. But
this guy gains you life on top of the life you're already gaining. It's very good. Like if you're going for like the Epicure or the other Zendikar card that I can't remember the name of, the 3-drop that's a 3/2 that does the Epicure effect.
Marauding Blight Priest or Blood Priest.
One of them.
Blight, I think, is the one that gives -/.
So that thing,
yep.
Those all work there too. So whatever you want to do, I think that particular deck is getting a huge benefit from these. Another deck that's kind of come up on the scene recently has been a mono green deck that's getting, I think, a little bit of help. You're getting the Knoll Hunter, which is a bear. It's a 2/2 for 2. It's obviously a Knoll. But it has that, what is that called? Pack Tactics?
Pack Tactics, yep.
And it's gets a +1/+1 counter if you attack with creatures that are total combined attack or total combined power of 6 or greater, which is pretty trivial for mono green.
Yeah.
It's really an easy thing for them to do. This is just a 2-drop with upside. The reason we see the Adapt creature, the little 2-drop that's 1 in a green, it has like 6 for Adapt or some crazy thing.
Yep.
The reason that's the 2-drop of choice in the deck is because late game that can be effective, and again, adding mana for green is pretty trivial. So we see that a lot of times. This is another good value 2-drop that's just above rate, and that's kind of what the mono green decks need, is something that's just above rate that can attack, put pressure, and be relevant in the late game. So I think he checks all those boxes.
Yeah, he really does.
The next card is a pretty exciting one, not just because of the creature type and the name.
But that's the majority of it for me.
We're talking about the Owlbear. It is a 5-drop that has so what is it, a 4/4 for 5 with trample?
4/4 for 5.
And it comes in and draws a card. It's really fills the role like the Silverback Shaman does in current mono green lists, but that one has to die to draw the card. This one immediately gives you value. It has trample, which is kind of the thing that kicks the mono green deck into a real deck, is the amount of trample you can get. You're generally not playing good blockers in Pauper because the format's fairly aggressive, or your control deck's playing little to no creatures. So trample's very relevant in the format, like throwing your 1/3 Oracle in front of it and things like that. It just doesn't really get the job done. You're still taking damage, you're still on the receiving end, and the owlbear really helps keep cards flowing. And again, it's the we're not blue problem of we just need more cards to add more pressure to the board.
Yeah.
So I think this is a welcome to include at 5. You get the dude that makes a food that has trample on 4. You get the Silverback Shaman on 5. The curve just ends up looking pretty good. Even if you're like doing a 3/3 split maybe of the Shamans and the Owlbears, or you're going 4/2 in either direction, I think having 6 of these 5-drops with like big stats and trample is definitely worth it. And then obviously any pump spell just makes them insane.
Absolutely. That's
So
not a thing green is afraid to run.
No. So we've talked about the decks that are getting gifts that are known quantities. But what about the decks that are possibly not currently in existence but could be a deck, or are very fringy, like more fringy than the mono green deck is? I think that the equipment deck is one of those decks. We saw Goblin Cavalier get one of the historic anthologies, I think is where he came from.
Yep.
And he's in there, so he's just ripe. He's like just I'm a build around. Do it. We finally are getting a good enough mix of equipment. Before we had Bone Splitter and we had the Tormentor's Helm from Kaldheim.
Yeah.
Those were kind of it for decent equipment at common. Boy, oh boy, did that change with this set. One thing that the common slot got a lot of really good versions of is cost-effective equipment. The first thing we'll look at is not necessarily the equipment, but a creature that may help in the archetype, because what we need is creatures that get a benefit from equipment, and that's Armory Veteran.
Yeah.
And he has a benefit of, when he's equipped, he gets, does he get First Strike?
Menace.
Menace, oh yes, even better. Hard to block.
Yeah.
So putting something on this creature and it attacking means you immediately need multiple blockers, and the equipment, some of this equipment's very cheap.
Yes. Oh my god.
Cheap to play, cheap to equip. In some cases, no mana whatsoever to equip.
Yeah. That one's one of my favorite ones from the set.
Yeah, I saw that and I had to read it twice to make sure that they legitimately put equip cost 0 on another card.
They fixed it, kind of.
Yeah, they attempted to. I like that they tried. So I think the Veteran's going to be a nice 2-drop for this deck. I think with the Cavalier at 1, and I think the rest of your build is probably going to either be white flyers or cheap green creatures, depending on what you want to put in the deck. I don't think you need to go green, because I don't think, and this is the only time I'll say this because I love this card, I don't think you'll need the Halberd out of green to make the deck work.
All right.
I think you can get away with probably Boros because you want the cheap flyers. You want the Raptors and the all your 1/1s. I mean, I don't think you can play it with blue to play that new guy, the new artifact bird that comes in and scries. I don't think you necessarily want to go blue.
Yeah,
you could try it, but I don't see blue-red really being a home for this when the spells deck just seems like a better choice. I think that you want to turn your critters into something a little bit better, and I think white with Healer's Hawk and the Raptor and things like that tend to be a little bit better of a choice. So the first card we'll look at that's an actual equipment is Boots of Speed. So this equipment's good because it's cheap.
Yeah, very cheap.
It equips for cheap. It's, what is it, a colorless on the equip?
Yeah.
And it gives +1/+0, and most importantly, haste.
Yeah.
That's a big game, because sliding around your equipment is kind of what you're doing. You're taking your top deck creatures and making them very good, and haste is no joke.
Yeah.
So I like how cheap it is. It's so, I don't think it's necessarily a 4-of piece of equipment in this deck, but certainly at least a 2-of.
Yeah. Like, it'll help close out a game.
Yeah. Oh yeah, just in the out of nowhere, like your opponent's sitting there like, please just don't top deck any creature. And when you can say don't top deck any creature, this deck's gonna have creatures and equipment in it. Maybe a little bit of interaction, but predominantly creatures and equipment.
Yeah.
So the odds of them not top decking a creature pretty low when you're talking like 20 creatures, probably 18 land, and then the rest is predominantly going to be equipment, possibly more creatures, or maybe 4 copies of interaction, an interactive spell.
Yeah.
Like, oof, it's very good.
I love it.
The next card, equally as exciting and kind of free. This is the closest this is the norm. I guess we would call the norm for free equipment.
Yeah.
Is Dueling Rapier, which has the when it comes into play clause, it can attach to a creature. So you get to avoid the very costly equip cost on this one.
Yeah, 4 is a backbreaker, but
very untenable. But the fact you can just pay a red and immediately get that, that's was that a +2/+0 on that guy?
Yeah, and flash.
And flash, yeah, is pretty gnarly.
If you're
good
running
with the Raptors,
yeah, the first strike Raptors love this thing. Mm-hmm. So, and then
a big deal.
If you
coming in, I guess I'll trade.
If you get
nope.
Yeah, if you get into a grindier matchup, you can equip it, but
absolutely.
I mean,
like 5-6 mana. All right, I'm going to put on the boots. I'm going to put on the rapier. Here they come.
Yeah, that's
awesome.
That's big. That's big game.
Yeah, very cool. Next is the card we were talking about a whole bunch, and that is the Leather Armor, which has the magical equip cost of 0.
Oh, it's so good.
So this seems lackluster, right? Like this is not a super exciting card, but the equip cost of 0 makes it pretty enticing to try to play in a deck like this because of the Goblin Cavalier. Goblin Cavalier comes down, turn 2, you play it, you can equip it with the Leather Armor, you can equip it with the Boots of Speed, and it's coming in all of a sudden for a boatload of damage.
Yeah.
So, I definitely think it's not worth... I don't know, again, I don't think this is necessarily a 4-of piece of equipment in the deck, but if we had more creatures that benefited from being equipped outside of just the Veteran and the Cavalier, I think this would be... I think the more of those creatures to get printed in the future, the more copies of the Leather Armor you're putting in your deck.
Yeah.
But I think for now, you're probably going to put in 2, maybe 3 copies of the Leather Armor. But it's just good. Adding a toughness to your creatures is relevant. If you're putting in like a 1/2 flyer and you put on the extra piece of equipment, your flyer's at a shock range, and that is a big deal.
Yeah, and
2 is kind of the sweet spot.
And even like the extra 1 to have to target it unless it gets countered is also pretty helpful.
Yes. Yep, the ward is not irrelevant. It definitely helps. Choking them on mana a little bit, choking them on making their cards good is difficult, and it's the kind of things that can squeak you out a win, especially a deck like this is trying to pressure as quick as it can.
Yeah.
So I think it's a good choice. And finally we get the card with, I think, some pretty cool artwork, and also a piece of relevant cheap equipment is the Spare Dagger.
Oh, I love this one.
Yeah, this is a really good one. Another piece of cheap interaction, or cheap equipment, that can help your creatures just get better, and it's got that little clause about dealing damage if you need to.
Yeah.
So I think that's pretty cool. I don't think is it the creature that deals the damage? Is that the wording on that one?
This creature deals 1 damage.
So very good with Death Touch creatures.
Yeah.
I don't know as though we'll be able to make that work per se in a build like this. I don't know as though you'd be reaching into black, and again, I don't think you need green. But, I mean, you could maybe play the little Death Touch creatures with equipment on them that just get so big you don't want to block them. That's a possible avenue. But with this Spare Dagger, just them coming into the red zone and tagging their best blocker is really nice.
Mm-hmm.
So that's a possible way to go about building the deck. I mean, that's what's cool, is it's just the equipment deck. There's no, there's no 60 that's right. It's how you want to build it, test it, and see what works. So, I think those are the cards you're going to add to your Bone Splitter and your Tormentor's Helm. And in some number, that's what you're going to be playing. I don't necessarily think that you have to play 4 of everything.
No, but
it
gives a good suite of options.
Tons. And that's what the deck was really lacking, I think. One more good, like, if this creature gets equipped, or for each equipment on this creature, or something like that. The Auriok Flame Chaser, or whatever his name was from Dominaria.
Yeah.
That gets I wish he were actually a common, like he got reprinted as on Arena, because that would be the card that kind of tied the room together for the deck. Mm-hmm. Because then you'd have 3 creatures that all said equipment matters here. Right now, the equipment matters stuff isn't as good as it needs to be, so one or two more creatures will push this into a direction to have a second color, a true second color, and really help kind of define what the equipment suite's going to be. So we'll see. Stay tuned, but I think that all those equipment are a big boost. There's now a stable foundation for a deck here. Moving into the next archetype, that's almost an archetype, is the aristocrats sacrifice creatures for value style deck. This is one of my personal favorite archetypes. I know Jayrod is also a big fan of sacking his creatures for value. You heard him mention Alesha already, so you know that road. So these creatures are pretty good at helping us out. The first one we get is the Sepulcher Ghoul, which is a very cheap version of a Phyrexian Ghoul or a Nantuko Husk. Mm-hmm. So the most important thing about this card is it has, for no mana, just simply sacrifice a creature. It gets a little bonus. That's irrelevant. I mean, it's going to be extra damage, but the thing you're looking for is that free sacrifice a creature. It's instant speed. There's no sorcery clause. Sacrifice a creature. This thing gets better. Sacrifice a creature. Your creature, when it dies, does the thing you want it to do. Yeah. And that kind of ties into the next card with Shambling Guest, which is a version of Festering Mummy, a version of the Festering Goblin that we've seen before, where when the creature dies, it gives a -1/-1. The Mummy I've been playing more than anything else because it gives a counter that's -1/-1. Yeah. The Ghast is interesting because it is slightly worse in that respect. It is just a -1/-1 till end of turn. But it can also, instead of doing that, create a treasure. Yeah. So you can turn your 1/1 into a treasure when it dies, which is really cool and makes it, the flexibility makes it intriguing.
Yeah, more options the better at common. Yeah. So.
Yes, I totally agree with you, and I think that's really nice. Sometimes that just doesn't matter. All right, I sack this to Plague Grisalka, I give -1/-1. It gives an additional -1/-1, but the creature is an X, 4, where it just kind of doesn't matter. Yeah. My board's not good enough to deal with this creature, no matter how many -1/-1 counters I can put on it in the short term. So it may just be better to get a treasure. You know what? I'll get the treasure, and I'll use one of the treasure payoffs in the set, or whatever I'm going to use, or the additional mana to be a turn ahead, whatever you're going to do. So I think the flexibility does help. The fact that it's not an actual 1/1 counter, but just a EOT 1/1. I think the treasure and we'll end up eking out the Mummy, most likely. And a side note, for those of you who follow us and know that I am a big fan of playing mono black zombies in this Arena Pauper format, both of these cards are zombies.
Yes, they are.
So there's some interesting stuff there. I'm contemplating going up maybe 2 copies of the Ghast in the deck, just because I feel like the treasure is kind of relevant. Being able to cast more spells off of it dying is really good, and just being able to put it in the red zone kind of however I want to, or just it's sitting on the board for Gem Palm Polluter Cycle, all pretty relevant. And usually that deck's just man, if I had 1 more mana, I'd be able to do something, or I get stuck on mana, and it's why isn't, now I have that outlet for mana, which is nice. So moving into other cards that relate to treasure specifically, there's a lot of treasure kind of benefit cards. If you spend treasure on them, they do a thing. I don't think too many of them are worth a whole heck of a lot. Probably. But I think some of them are. In terms of Pauper, I think Limited obviously is a whole different beast. But I think for Pauper, it's a little bit different. So we'll get into the kind of the big payoffs as we move through this. This first card, though, is Deadly Dispute, and this does in fact deal with treasure. Yep. But it's important. I think the thing that makes this card interesting to me is not necessarily what it does, because it's kind of like Village Rites, right? It's Village Rites and it makes a treasure. But more important than that is the fact for Arena Pauper that it is sacrifice a creature or an artifact.
Absolutely.
Which makes it a good, when people read this, they just go, worst Village Rites, and move on. Or artifact is a big deal, because in the last Historic Anthology, we got Ichor Wellspring. Yeah. And that is an artifact that when it comes in, it draws you a card. When it goes out, it draws you a card. So combined with this particular card, it can draw you 3 cards and make a treasure.
Yeah, and that's pretty big game.
That is a huge deal for two cards, turns into 3 cards and a treasure. So you're going up a card, and you're getting an additional mana to use. That is a very big deal. Is this instant or sorcery? I can't recall.
This is instant.
Sure. Yeah, so still not losing any timing. It's just one additional colorless. You get to sack the artifact. So I think that is kind of the difference maker between that and Village Rites. So don't sleep on this card if you're playing something that... I think it's a good way to draw cards in non-blue. I think you're going to see a lot of this kind of thing is going to be, oh, okay, well, I'll do this. You can also, if you're playing like multicolors, but you don't want to touch blue, or you want to touch blue in a very limited way, you can use this to just sack your Prophetic Prism that's just not doing anything right now.
Yeah.
To turn it into more cards. There's a lot of options here if you're playing like an artifact base kind of value deck. So I think that doesn't really exist. It could be Rakdos, it could be Grixis, but I think that there's a possibility where that could be a thing. And I think some of the Deadly Dispute and most possibly critically to the deck is the next card, which is Devour Intellect.
Whew, this card.
Yeah, this card is, it's just, they discard a card for 1. Not good. However, there are times that discarding their last card is relevant, so it's not entirely unplayable. But if you spend a treasure to cast this card, it's basically Thoughtseize.
Yeah. And that's kind of crazy.
Yeah, that's crazy to think about in this format. So I went back and I did a look over cards that exist today that handle treasure. There's not a whole heck of a lot in black. You have the pirate that when it dies it makes a treasure. It's like a 2/1 for 2. And then you have the Gleaming Barrier, which is the 0/4 for 2 colorless, that when it dies it makes a treasure. That's kind of all you have access to. Red, however, makes a bunch of treasure on the pretty cheap. So you can like spend 2 mana. Like there's one that gives creature +2/+0, and it gives possibly First Strike, and it makes a treasure. Mm-hmm. There's a bunch of little cards like that could be pretty good if you're playing like Rakdos Control. So you're playing like Dust Legion Zealots and Phyrexian Ragers. I'll block with my Rager, give it +2/+0 and First Strike, make a treasure, sack the treasure to hit you with Devour Intellect, and then leave up 4 mana for a Tendrils. Something like that is a pretty interesting notion, and something we haven't seen before. To date, I'd say the best control decks in Pauper, and the premier control deck has been Dimir. So blue and black. I think that possibly red is now in the conversation, depending on how important it is for the deck to want to double spell. But being able to lay on a base of Frostbite as your cheap removal spell instead of something like a Moment of Craving is really nice. Because the Snowlands are basically free, even the Snow Duels. So that's no charge for putting in the Snow basics in your deck. And you get to use Frostbite, and you get the extra value a little later on. And you get to use Devour Intellect, both of which are super duper cheap. And you get these little creatures. If you want things to block, you get a lot of little effects, little aggro creatures to attack with. You get the ETB effects, it's when they die effects. So there's possibly a configuration that looks like it could be pretty good. And the next card kind of relates to that too, and that's the Hired Hexblade.
Yeah.
So read the text on this one. Refresh my memory to the exact text on it.
When Hired Hexblade enters the battlefield, if mana from a treasure was spent to cast it, you draw a card and you lose 1 life. It's a 2/2 for 1 and a black.
Yep, so Dusk Legion Zealot, essentially with better stats, and if otherwise it's a Nilla 2/2, or if you spent the treasure, it's Dusk Legion Zealot with better stats, literally twice as powerful, twice as tough.
Yeah. Or just a cheaper Phyrexian Rager, however you want to look at it.
Absolutely. And I think all those things kind of are exactly what a deck like this would want to be doing, trading off cheap creatures. You could possibly use Feign Death in this deck. There's a lot of little things you could be doing to trade off value and get ahead with things like Foreboding Fruit and things like that to give yourself card advantage in the later game and just keep getting that +1 card as you're playing creatures on the board. It's just, you get access to Suffocating Fumes for the rats at all aggro decks with tiny little critters, tokenist decks, the life gain deck. So I think the deck definitely has some potential game. here. And another card that intrigues me in this deck, because it's a value card, is the Horde Rubber.
Yes.
Which is a possible avenue to help us out on that front. Read the text on this guy as well, just so I'm not making a mistake.
Horde Rubber, 1/3 for 1 and a black. When Horde Rubber deals combat damage to a player, create a treasure token.
Yeah. So it's an interesting one. This one's a little harder to do, but in the black decks, especially pair it with red, your deck's going to be predominantly cheap removal. So being able to go, I'm going to play this guy on 2, pass the turn, next turn I untap, removal spell, attack with this guy. That's pretty good, and that's pretty realistic for those decks.
Yeah.
So it's just like, I'm going to do that, I'm going to make a treasure, I'm going to sack it, I'm going to devour intellect to make sure your next turn play is destroyed. So you've just kind of dismantled their turns. And if you can keep pressure on, or put down at the next turn you untap and play Ill-Gotten Inheritance, or whatever it is that you're going to use to win the game, that could be pretty darn good.
Yeah, absolutely.
So I think that there's a possible deck there, and the last card is the final card for us to go over in this review, but it kind of ties the treasure room together. Not necessarily just for this treasure deck that I'm, kind of hypothesizing, but this card does something interesting for the format, and that's the classic Mimik. We love Mimics. Well, we don't love Mimics. If you've reached for a treasure chest in your D&D career, you don't love a Mimik.
You don't.
But it is a classic. Everybody who's played D&D long enough has probably gotten a hold of a Mimik at some point or another. And it is a treasure worth noting. It's a creature treasure.
Yeah, I was today years old when I found that out, because I didn't read that part.
Yep, I don't know why I looked at it, to be honest with you, but it made me laugh in the same way that Ginger Brute makes me laugh that it's a food golem.
Yeah, it's a food golem.
Yeah, it's just pretty funny, and the fact the Mimik is a treasure creature is pretty great. It sacks to add mana, like any creature that is a treasure presumably would. Most importantly and most interestingly, outside of just it being a treasure for the treasure benefit decks, is that it has the ability to pump mana into it and make it a creature.
Yeah.
We haven't really had that in Arena Pauper, so now we have a creature that demands an instant speed piece of removal to interact with it. Obviously, any artifact removal will work, but if you don't have an instant speed piece of removal, you can't interact with this card, and it's just always there. There's no edict. Well, there's Farika's Libations. That's the instant speed edict, and I think there's one from Guild Pact, or not Guild Pact, but the Ravnica block.
Yeah, Allegiance, or possibly Guilds of.
Guilds of, yeah. And
I can't remember exactly.
Yeah, I think it's in the one with Rakdos, whatever one that is. Undercity's Embrace or something like that.
Yeah, I want to say it's Allegiance, but I'm not 100%.
Yeah, me either. I'm bad with card names. I know. Before you leave a comment, I know.
There's so many. There's so many cards.
Yeah, there are, even in Arena Pauper. And we've been playing forever, so they just all mush together. But those cost 3, so you do have the chance to go, before I activate my Mimik, I'm going to use my Devour Intellect to snipe your hand, make sure you don't have any way to interact, and then now that I know the coast is clear, I will Mimik and come in for 3. So it's pretty cool what it allows, and it could have a home in the control decks that could use it for the mana, could use it as a way to close out a game.
Yeah.
It is potentially going to be part of the format just because of the fact that it's one of our first creatures that can activate at instant speed, if you will, and attack and then become a just non-creature card on the opponent's turn, which is pretty unique. Not to Magic, but to Arena Pauper.
I mean, just Pauper in general. This ability is most of the time reserved for, honestly, just rare or uncommon lands. That's the majority of this effect is going to be.
You'll see like the totems from Time Spiral block and obviously some older versions of this.
Yeah, or like the clue stone, or not the clue stones, the key runes.
Key runes, yep.
From one of the other Ravnica sets.
Yeah, I think because this one has to sacrifice itself to get the mana, they gave it the pass. Because most of the time those just always tapped for a mana or became a creature.
Yeah.
This one has a bit of a drawback in that you have to sack it because it's like a treasure. But the fact it can turn into a 3/3 is very relevant. It's mana when you need it, or late game, it's a beater that they can't interact with because they've grinded themselves out of interaction that can take the Mimik at instant speed. So,
yeah,
pretty flexible dude.
I'm a big fan.
Yeah, I think it's pretty awesome. So we'll see.
Yeah, at first I didn't even realize it was a common.
Yep. Yep. It's cool to see.
Very
it's
strong.
Yeah, I think there's some neat stuff that we're getting. Again, I don't know about Pauper just because Modern Horizons 2 has made that really rough. But
as
in
is
terms
tradition.
of Arena Pauper, in terms of Arena Pauper, there's a lot to be excited about from the Forgotten Realms. I did not touch on it. I'll just briefly mention it. Anything that has venture into the dungeon on it, mostly because I have no freaking clue if that's good. I haven't seen a card that wowed me at common with entering like conditions to venture into the dungeon. But the fact that you get effects when you do it might be pretty good.
Like I want to try to build a deck, maybe myself or on stream, one of the nights that we stream, and just see what the options are. Is it feasible? And then is it worth it?
Right. It's kind of like how we did that
questions.
with Lesson and Learn when we did the last set review. Because it's similar in that it's giving a spell another ability, or kind of creating, if you will, like a weak second spell.
Yeah.
I don't think it's as potent as Lesson and Learn because those are standalone cards that are playable, where these are kind of like pieces of cards. But they are intended to be played across all of the formats. So there are some effects in some of these dungeons. It's like, oh shit, like that's very powerful for a common to be able to do. But you need to have time to do it. And one thing, like we mentioned, this is more of an aggressive format, or at least you're aggressively getting your game plan going. Absolutely. So it's going to be hard. I think a control deck may flirt with trying to venture into the dungeon, but I don't think that many decks are going to be too interested in it.
It's going to be rough.
Yeah, we'll see. I don't know. Definitely let us know in the comments what you think about venturing into the dungeon, or if there's a card. I know there's cards when they hit, you can venture into the dungeon, things like that. There's also that honorable mention to the 3/2 for 3, that when it hits, you draw a card. It's definitely some of the best stats we've seen on an Ophidian.
Yeah.
And at common in a long time. There's just no deck that I know of that takes advantage of that deck. We also had the one from Dimir a while back with the 2/3 when you surveilled, it could hit and draw a card. So it was like this weird conditional Ophidian. But I just don't think there's like a tempo deck that would play a 3/2. It's just too easily sniped by all the removal in the format. Mm-hmm. So as much as I want that to be a cool card, I just don't quite think it is. We had the Otter already from Ikoria that was a 2/2 that did it. This is just a slightly better version of that in terms of +1 power, but I just don't think it's quite good enough.
Unfortunately not.
Yeah, so we'll see. Time will tell. Again, let us know in the comments if there's something with the dungeon that you're interested in for Arena Pauper. Of course, like Jayrod said, as soon as there's an event, we will definitely be doing it. I'm sure I'll probably, at some point on the stream, force people to muck around with my my test brews, because I have to. That's every Sunday at 8 o'clock Eastern on our Twitch channel, which is twitch.tv/superliminalfilms. You can follow us over there. We play lots of Arena Limited. We play Pauper whenever it is available to us. Obviously, sometimes when it's not, I just force it.
Sometimes.
So if you want to play, if you're interested in that format specifically and you want to test decks, come over to our Twitch channel and you can play us on the stream. We have a Discord. You can definitely jump in there as well and be like, hey, I'm playing Pauper. Who's down for games? Or look at this list. Can someone help me deck doctor it? We can do that for you on the stream. We can do that just in the Discord. Whatever you like. We're all about the Arena Pauper. It's one of the few formats I can say that I can speak pretty intellectually about. And I feel like I am an authority on the subject, because that has never been the case with me in Magic. But Arena Pauper, I definitely think I have a pretty good handle on it.
For sure.
And so let us know if you think we missed anything, if you're venturing into the dungeon, any other thoughts that you have, concerns, ideas. Maybe we missed like a combo piece or something. I haven't done a super fine tooth comb over the spoiler yet to see if there's like some little interaction I missed. So if you saw it, let me know in the comments. Of course, that's what they're there for. We love hearing from everybody. We want to make sure the content is interesting and, is engaging. So I think that's all I got. Jayrod, do you have anything you want to add?
I think I'm good.
All right, everybody. So until next time, roll more D20s?
Yeah.